Making video games accessible with Tabby. And we have a presentation that's going to be played, and Tabby can answer questions if you have them. So please feel free to answer questions or ask questions in the chat. She probably won't answer them until after the presentation, but just so you know. Okay.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hey, welcome.
Yeah, so say hi, Tabby.
Hello. I'm here. I'll just be quiet a little while the video is playing, but I'm in chat as well. Hello.
All right. Well, let's get started.
All right. Hello and welcome to my talk about making the Big Con accessible. So hi, I'm Tabby Rose and I'm the UX director at Mighty L. My background was actually not originally in games, but instead in biology and medical illustration. Although today's talk is definitely about UX in games, I like to think that my approach is a little bit based in my former science education life as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So Mighty L's debut game, The Big Con, launched on August 31st. The Big Con is a 90s comedy adventure game about Allie, a teen whose mom's video store is under threat from loan sharks. Allie decides to ditch band camp and go on a cross-country adventure to con people out of their cash and save the store. It was a blast to work on, and I'm super proud that it's out now. This is my first role as a UX and UI designer, so I'd like to do a little bit of a post-mortem, talk about my process and helping our game to come to life. Specifically, I wanted to talk about my work in making the Big Con accessible in the hopes that it inspires some designers out there to make their games more accessible too. So let's talk about some of the accessibility features in the Big Con. When I talk about accessibility, I'm not just talking about options, although all options are accessibility options too. I mean that the entire UI and UX is designed with the player in mind, and knowing that we want as many people as possible to be able to play out of the gate. So that means there are built-in accessibility features as well as options and also communication outside the game itself to facilitate an enjoyable experience for players. So large font size and high text contrast help make dialogue easier to read from farther away or with low vision. All of our dialogue in UI was contrast tested to make sure it passes WCAG guidelines, which is meant for web but works perfectly well for games too. We use large interaction regions for things like pickpocketing, eavesdropping, and picking up items to make it easier to move around the world and do stuff in it, even if you don't change any of the other difficulty options. Information is usually communicated through multiple channels like icons, color, and movement as opposed to color alone. We don't have voice acting, but also none of the audio in the game is required to hear to play, although it is used to enhance the experience. And we always show what buttons need to be used for different actions in the UI so that players don't need to remember that information. There are also features which are optional, meaning players can either choose whether to take advantage of them or they can be directly altered in the options menu. So we implemented a one-button difficulty option for pickpocketing, which is a major mechanic in the Big Con. The regular version of the minigame requires a long button press and precise timing, which is not always easy or possible for someone to do if they have a motor disability. Of course, this also makes pickpocketing easy for many other reasons, like needing to review the game quickly, testing or speedrunning, getting bored of the mechanic, or getting wrist or hand strain. There are story hints and tutorials given via Rad Ghost, who is a very cool NPC, and you'll see him on the next slide, but you can ignore them if you want to figure things out on your own. We also use a notebook to automatically store facts for various cons and let you know when objectives have been reached. This was actually the first feature that I designed for the game, and I'll talk about that a little more later as well. In the options, you can turn off distracting dialogue effects and change the font throughout the game if you find the default difficult to read. We also implemented extensive control remapping. That feature actually didn't ship at launch because we have some issues with it on console, but it will be coming back in a patch in the very near future. It's my strong belief that accessibility doesn't just stop at the game itself. Players won't know these options exist unless we tell them, and for some people that makes the difference between buying the game or not. For that reason, we made accessibility part of our PR and marketing plan, which is part of why I'm here, and also spent some time making a fully accessible version of our website, which also lists all of the accessibility features as well as all the other information about the game, including the trailer, the core mechanics, and how you can buy it. That website was made to work with keyboard only and screen readers to facilitate getting at our game information easily for anyone who doesn't want to sift through our very cool but very inaccessible 90s style landing page. Our marketing team has also been making an effort to build accessibility into all of our communication, so we've started captioning trailers and other video content and adding alternative text to images on social media and more. So let's turn to how I approach design in order to build features. As a note, it's difficult for me to separate accessibility design from my overall philosophy as a game designer. So some of the things that I want to touch on are more general design skills that come in handy when approaching accessibility problems. So games always exist as a conversation between a player and a game program. Players provide inputs or controls which change something within the game program, which then presents some kind of feedback, which changes something within the player, and that prompts them to choose a new input, and so on. This is how I think of games. This is my game loop. So UX and accessibility exist in the input and output phases. How do we make controls as seamless as possible so that any player can play? And how do we make feedback as understandable as possible so that any player can interpret it? Players are integral parts of the games we create, as I just showed. A game literally doesn't exist without a player on the other end. So therefore, as a UX designer and a game designer and an accessibility designer, my most important skills are empathy and communication. That's so that I can design controls that players can use and design feedback that they can understand. And I think this is where my background comes in. So my background was all about scientific communication, basically how to use images, words, and layouts to explain difficult concepts to different kinds of audiences. It's so important to know who you're speaking to so that you can design communication effectively. Basically, I think of myself as a teacher or a communicator. When I'm making games, that means my main job is to teach players what the mechanics are and how they can use their verbs or controls effectively. And as you can see by some of the student and early work that I did as a biomedical communicator, you might be dealing with a lot of different audiences here. So it could be patients that you have to give sensitive information to and communicate sensitively to. It might be a doctor who requires something a little higher level, maybe a little more technical. It could be the lay population, in which case, you might be doing something very general and easy to understand. Or it might be like kids. There's a lot of different audiences, just like there are in games. So I think that this has really come in handy. All right, so as a teacher of the games that I make, teacher in quotes, I want to remove their barriers for learning, which in this case means I want players to be able to be motivated to finish the game, able and motivated to finish the game. I want to scaffold their learning so that they feel like they pulled off challenges themselves and make sure the game didn't get in their way of having fun. And as much as possible, I want to make design decisions or options that make the game systems flexible to the player's learning style, disabilities, and preferences. As a designer for humans, I find it very important to know something about human psychology and sensation and perception as it relates to design. So if you look at Gestalt principles of design and the science of visual processing especially, these are good places to start. Basically, the way that we sense the world with our bodies and the way our brains perceive that input are different systems, and a good designer knows a little bit about both. I want to take a range of abilities into account when designing for accessibility, which might mean going back to basics. For example, a colorblind player might have trouble discerning different colored icons, but the science tells me that all humans are, in general, better at distinguishing movement and luminance or contrast rather than color. So then maybe my initial design uses those aspects for crucial information to start with, and color becomes something that's only used for aesthetics. That way, I am taking colorblind players into account, but I'm also designing for the majority of humans. And design for flexibility. So if it can't be built in because of technical or artistic constraints, then it's time to make an option. For example, we had a specific look and feel for the fonts that we used in the game so that they would reflect the art direction and the purpose, for example, being handwritten into a notebook. But when it means that someone might simply not be able to play with the default in place, we provide options that empower them to choose the experience that allows them the least friction. So keep in mind that tutorials, especially optional ones, also give players choices about how much information that they get at a given time. I would add that making space to explain what your options do in-game is also an example of this. My advice is to use plain and simple language when crafting these explanations. And of course, test your options with a range of audience members, including players with disabilities. Listen to their feedback and adjust within your ability to do so. You may have heard the saying, and in fact I said it earlier, all options are accessibility options. I would say the opposite is also true. All accessibility options are options. People don't need a reason to prefer playing in different ways. If the goal is to motivate players to finish your game, then providing options never hurts that goal. And as a practical example, I was recently asking people on Twitter about their preferences around remapping menu buttons. And I found out that most people, even if they don't have an accessibility need, like the ability to change what the confirm and cancel buttons are, like to switch them between B and A or A and B, among other things, because we go between different consoles, and it's like cognitively a little bit difficult to have to make that switch in your brain. Like, why not provide the option, right? All right, so now that you know a little bit about my approach, I'll give you a little peek into my process on the Big Con. I started with paper prototyping. As I mentioned before, my first task when I got hired was to redesign the notebook feature, as early demo events were showing that players didn't really use this feature to keep track of their cons, or they didn't know how to. And even though the notebook feature is like a core feature of the game, it is also used for accessibility in that it allows you to remember what you've been doing if you come back at a future play session or even during play. It just helps you, like, you know, keep your thoughts in order, right? So I made a paper prototype, combined it with the demo, and then play tested with friends and neighbors, since I just needed some quick feedback and data about how people wanted to use the system. Once that was accepted by the team, I used the data in the notebook experiment to begin mocking the UI in Adobe XD so that the team could play through parts of the UI flow, including the notebook, main menu, and options panels. I also did accessibility research around the same time. So I used the game accessibility guidelines to make a big list of considerations and prioritized or annotated them based on risk and reward for our time and budget. Because I came in on this project partway through development, there were already some technical or design decisions in place that would prevent me from implementing absolutely every accessibility feature we wished for, and furthermore, my time was split between doing the UI design and programming for the entire game and making the accessibility plan. So this meant that we absolutely had to prioritize this list and choose the options that would have, in our estimation, the largest payoff for the most players within the bounds of our dev time. Anything we didn't have time for but was still feasible got put in a list for long-term support or to wait and see if the feature was highly requested later. Once we had a working design in-game, we contacted Able Gamers to help us set up a player panel. So they have a service where disabled players can sign up as playtesters and be matched with studios looking to get their feedback on games. We selected 9 participants and paid them to play the demo. We recorded their playthrough, we made notes throughout, and conducted interviews with each person to get a sense of what was working and what wasn't. This included basic gameplay as well as accessibility options that we had in place at the time. When we made our list of playtesters, we filtered for people who listed our genre, which is adventure games, as one of their favorites, because we wanted people who are actually in our audience, and we also tried to balance for gender distribution. Our players had a range of needs, a range of controllers, and a range of play styles, and the interviews were absolutely invaluable. So based on their feedback, we came up with a new development plan and adjusted as much as we could before launch. And luckily, we had a lot of accessibility options in place already when we did this testing, so we didn't have a lot of requests for things, but there were some things that we wanted to change that we didn't know about before we went into that testing. And some things that we weren't able to change, unfortunately. So post-launch, we're still talking to players with disabilities who have questions about whether they'll be able to play or who want to stream or help out in some way. We wouldn't even be able to do this if we weren't making an effort to let our players know that we care about accessibility and that there are options for them in-game. So like I showed before, we're also working on making our marketing itself more accessible so that more potential players can hear about us. And that also means we're trying to push for our publisher to include things like captions on trailers when we provide them, and cultivate an audience that cares about accessibility. And lest it go without being said, a big part of my job has been advocating for accessibility with my team and getting them on board, which they absolutely have. It really takes the whole team buying in for this to work, otherwise it's going to be hard to get the resources and help that you need. So some takeaways. Making your games more accessible is definitely a process. You're going to be constantly researching, learning, talking to people, and trying new things. Look at other design disciplines. The web dev world has been having this conversation for a long time, and there are a lot of great resources there. Look at education, infographic design, and regular old graphic design. Remember that the best people to ask about making your game more accessible are the people who need barriers removed. Compensate them for their time and work. Accessibility is in some ways about compromise and doing the best you can with the available resources. That's not an excuse to wait until the last minute and run out of time and budget for this work. It should be incorporated into your game and your UX process as early as possible, with the understanding that you may not have control over a project as early as you might like. If you get buy-in from the whole team, the work is easier and it can go deeper. communicate your limitations as well as your features. Not every game is for everyone, and that's okay. You're helping players make informed decisions without having to buy and potentially return your game, which is like a horrible user experience, and find games that they'll enjoy. You're not going to get everything perfectly right the first time, but that's okay. Just bring your knowledge to your future projects. So thank you so much for your time. You can follow me online at Tabby Rose, and you can check out the Big Con and our future work at Mighty L. Cheers. Okay, we're done.
Okay.
All right. So if anybody has any more questions for me, let me know, and I'm going to help out. I'm just looking at myself on screen.
And I'm just going to put closed captioning on too, because we were just talking about accessibility.
Wonderful. Oh, that's so cool. I love that. By the way, that talk does have captions as well.
I had a hard time installing them in to get them to work. Because
that's okay.
We had some internet power issues with the snowstorm this weekend. So it just got left off the
agenda. That's okay. The talk exists, and if this ends up getting put on your YouTube page as well, there are captions that can go with it.
The YouTube caption thing will automatically put the captions on when we put it on. So
yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm just looking at the chat. So there were two questions. I think they might have both been from Terry, but there was a question about alt text and a question about AAA game studios, and it looks like I'm receiving a couple of more now. So in terms of alt text for images, the purpose of alt text is so that if somebody has no vision or no ability to view the images for any reason, that might be for like an internet reason or other technological reasons, alternative text describes the image to someone. If they have a screen reader on, the screen reader will read the alternative text automatically. So what that means is that if you have images that are actually descriptive, like they add to the content of the website in some way, then alternative text provides a way to like describe that in the context of the website. If you're using images that are like design decorations, like a line or something like that, then you specifically leave the alt text blank so that it doesn't get described and like mess things up. Twitter has the ability to add alt text. I don't know about all social media, but Twitter definitely does, but you have to turn it on in a setting, I think, in order to be able to like type it in when you're adding an image. But I try to encourage all of the social media people at our studio, anybody who's going to be posting social media, to add some kind of text. And there are documents out there about how to write good alternative text that is like descriptive, but not overly descriptive. Yeah, exactly. So LinkedIn does it. It's really good. It does help people, especially if you're doing an ad for the Kanya, for example. And it has text in it. That text can't be parsed by like anything unless you put it in the alt text or you have it somewhere else in the ad, like you have other text with it. So if you're only showing your date in an image, then you need to have alternative text to clarify that for anybody who can't see it. Okay, AAA studios, do they have good accessibility policies? In the last 5 years, I think a lot of studios have really realized that accessibility is a big concern, and it's a big, it's good for marketing. Like there is a pretty vocal community out there, and there are more consoles that are taking notice. So Microsoft with its adaptive controller has really led the way on that. But a lot of the consoles are at this point, they have more recommendations and requirements. Actually, Microsoft also just introduced a thing where if you release on Xbox, they have like an accessibility tag system now. So you can get basically certified that your game has certain things, and then they'll add tags to it and people can use those to search on them. when they're making purchasing decisions, which is pretty cool. Ubisoft has done a lot in, like, they actually were kind of leading the charge for a while with accessibility in terms of what they add in their games. In the last couple of years, the Spider-Man game that came out for PS4 was like kind of touted as having really good options, and Last of Us 2 has apparently like just a ton of options. So those are some places to start if you're interested in AAA games that are doing that. Can't speak to the games themselves. I did play Last of Us 2, it's not my thing, but yeah. Okay, so I'm looking back in the chat now so that I can answer more questions. Yes, when you change the UI for accessibility, it does make it nicer looking for everybody. Because the thing is that you're really like applying graphic design principles at that point, and any kind of like good sort of like user experience. That's what UX stands for, by the way, if that's not clear. User experience is what we're doing here. So anything that's improving the experience is probably going hand in hand with accessibility, which is great. Did I receive conflicting information? No, actually, the most that you'll find is that like you do have to make decisions between what you're going to support. So, you know, if you're really focused on doing good motor accessibility, maybe you're going to have to not do some of the other things. Like you do have to pick and choose which features you're going to have time to implement. But I wouldn't necessarily say they're in conflict. It's just that you have to make choices when you're going about things. Recommendations on games suitable for individuals with epilepsy. So games that are not suitable for for epileptic individuals are supposed to have warnings on them right at the beginning. On our end, there is a test that you can do called the Harding test, which basically, this is also for film and TV, but you can send in clips of your game and get it tested for whether it has like, you know, flashing or repeating patterns and stuff like that. And it's supposed to get like a, you know, like a pass or fail. And I guess if it fails, you put a warning on, or ultimately better is to try and remove it from the game. I really only know of games that are not good at it, like that have been called out in the media for it. I know Cyberpunk was, Cyberpunk 2077 had a big scandal because they included something that was not only an epilepsy trigger, but it was like intentionally like something that is used in epilepsy studies to trigger like seizures. Like it was very bad. Anyway, they did remove it. I think the studio worked with individuals from the disability community to remove it after it was found, but they had like a bad social media response to it at first, and it was very badly handled. And now I think it's gone. Yeah, it was horrifying. Yeah, I agree. It was a journalist that found it and was triggered and wrote about it, and then had a bunch of backlash from players basically saying really bad things to her about it. But the studio did reach out and changed it. So yes, not all, even AAA studios sometimes do get it wrong, or often do get it wrong. In terms of what's good though, I mean, indie games probably usually good, but at the same time, they might be the ones to not check, like to not know to check. The best that you can do is probably just preview it yourself, or check and see if it has warnings or if a test has been done, or even just maybe reach out to developers and see if they know about it. if they know if it's been tested. We did not test the Big Con, but we did suspect that there was one. There's like during conversations, there's a pattern that plays in the background, and we just made an option to turn it off, so you can not have that visual distraction if you don't want it. I don't actually think it would be a problem, but it is like a repeated pattern that's like moving around on the screen a little bit. It's not flashing wildly or anything, but yeah, it's a whole thing. Okay, from Minty Mordecai, I'm working on a third-person shooter. In the action sequences, the lower part of the screen where subtitles would be is a text log. Pausing the game allows you to read the full log. Is this a good design for hearing impaired who have difficulty playing while a conversation is going on? It is really good to have a log that you can read back on, because it's not always possible to keep up with like with the text as other things are going on in the game, and some people who might have like, you know, some cognitive or attentional issues might like to go back to it later. That's also just nice for like not getting frustrated or missing content or anything. I mean, I would recommend captioning if you can at all kind of have it, but it sounds like, yeah, I don't know. This sounds like it would be okay to me. I have to see it. But it sounds like it would be okay as long as the text is large enough. That's actually one of the biggest problem that big games have, is that they continually make the text too small. Sorry, Lindsay, I haven't even... Was there any questions that you had or anything we wanted to chat about? I'm just going through the chat. The text is large. That's good. Basil Berry asks, how did you transition from biomedical communications to UX? They're both fields I'm interested in, so I'm interested in the career path. In biomedical communications, that's a master's program at U of T. It's the only one in the country, which is kind of cool and weird. But it's very technology focused. And when I went through, there were two streams. There was an animation stream and an interaction stream. So I was already kind of interested in making games at that point. So I went through the interaction stream. And during the course of my study, I took a bunch of UX related classes. So I did straight UX. We did information visualization. We made websites. I did build a game for my final project. And so I ended up doing, like, I learned how to code and stuff for that in the course of my studies. So actually they did go pretty hand in hand, because I learned a lot of UX while I was there. But in terms of the transition after that, I ran my own studio for a while. So I don't think I mentioned in the presentation, but I used to run Axon Interactive, and we made Quench, which is the shirt that I'm wearing today. And after we finished with that, I decided that I wanted to not be the boss for a while. So I went to work at Mighty Yell, and I kind of shoehorned my way into doing UX there, because that was something that I was always really interested in. But I had been doing web design before this as well. So it was kind of like, it was all related work, even though previously I was doing it for healthcare, and now I do it for games. Like the type of problems that you're solving are pretty similar. Yeah, he has the same shirt. It's a good shirt. It is the quenchiest. Oh, they have all the questions. They really do. Are there any more questions? I think I covered everything. I hope I went back far enough. Yeah, I think that was it. So thank you so much for coming to my talk. I'm sure that there's a lot of other things to get into today, because it sounds like you have a pretty full schedule. Are there resources you'd recommend for starting to learn? Yes. So there are two really good ones. There's the Game Accessibility Guidelines. You can just search Game Accessibility Guidelines, and they have like a beginner, intermediate, and advanced section for all kinds of things that you can try doing. And the other one is the what's it called? The Able Gamers APX. I can't remember what that stands for, but they'll mail you like a set of cards, like flashcards basically, that have different sort of problems and solutions on them. I have a copy of it around here somewhere, but I'm in boxes right now because we're in the process of moving, so I can't pull them out. But they're like kind of a little bit more of a gamified way to start thinking about accessibility. That might be good too. Oh no. People suck, but not you people. You are all great. Yeah. I think that's everything. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about accessibility for a while. It's kind of my favorite thing right now, so
thank you so much, Tabby. Like, that was awesome.
I hope that helped. Yeah, that's awesome. Lindsay, it was so nice of you and Terry to invite me. I appreciate it a lot.
No, we love to have your stuff there. And send me a link to your game, and I will post it in the chat and stuff like that if they want to.
Oh, I will. Here, actually, I can do it right now. I'll post a link.
it won't let you post because you're not an admin, because we have a
Okay.
not posting
Well,
link, so you have to share it.
It's just mightyyell.com.
Okay. I will find that and I will toss it in the chat.
That will go straight to us. That will go to our cool, like we made like a 90s website version of it, and then there's an accessible website button right at the top that you can click on if you want to see what that version looks like.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to hang up with you there, Tabby. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.